people like yourself and myself, we have to form an identity through other means.
Yeah.
And where we don't necessarily connect with our heritage, perhaps, or certainly speaking for myself,
Yeah, for sure.
or religion or whatever it might be, is that actually we find our identity. So for me, pirate radio culture and sound system, as a result, sound system culture was the place where I felt most at home. It was the place where I didn't have to be what people expected me to be or the stereotype of who I should be. And actually the thing that resonates through me, literally and figuratively, was bass. Wow. And so that was the space where I felt most at home, where I could be myself. And it was ironic because whether, in academia or whether in a club, I would be the only person who looks like me. Perhaps you felt the same as well
for sure.
when you were coming up, is that it is, that uniqueness and that kind of loneliness in a way is kind of what I'm really proud of. In terms of code switching, I'm probably most comfortable when I know that I'm the only person who looks or speaks like me in a particular space, because I feel unique. And I found that with pirate radio culture as well, it was a space where there were no faces, it was just audio. And I was obsessed by pirate radio, and I could tell you all of the pirate radio stations that existed in North London between whatever it was, like 95 and 2003. I'm kind of letting on my age now, but that was really important to me, because ultimately they became, I wouldn't say they were my friends, but they were like my companions. Like, music was my companion, and it made me feel safe, and it made me feel welcome, no matter what I looked like or what I sound like, or indeed what I played.
It's so true, because that's what I fell in love with radio as well, because it's so inclusive.
Yeah.
Like, it's very intimate, like the microphone and you, and same with DJing as well. Back then, I found like DJing, you can't see the DJ really. Now I know it's changed a lot, and like they put the DJ front and center. But before, like, it didn't matter what you looked like. It was about the music that's playing. It doesn't matter who you are. Anyone can kind of jump on.
Exactly.
And that's where you connect, don't you? Feel like the sense of belonging. Yeah. But then one thing that I found really interesting now is music is like using that to find my heritage. So like I've been exploring like Bollywood and Punjabi garage, and like finding the middle ground for me as well, because I don't feel necessarily that I fit in completely with the South Asian side of myself, but the middle ground of like the birth here in London is where I really kind of fit in.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's something special about London, and I would, I'm sure a lot of people would say that about their native city and so on, but there is something about that, it's a bit of a trope, but the melting pot of London, where actually, truthfully, it's about what you play, not what you look like. And there's something very liberating about that, which also kind of tied into my want to explore other cultures. But, as I mentioned earlier, like I went to the ESEA, the East and Southeast Asian Music Meetup, just last week, just around the corner here in St. Pancras. And it was a revelation for me, because it was suddenly people who looked like me, who were working in the same industry as me. And it's weird that it's taken 20 years to kind of come back, actually longer than that, to come back round to where I feel comfortable in a space, and also finding other people who have been through that similar kind of discordant journey through their identity and music. So it's interestingly, on a slight kind of multi-hyphenate tangent, it's actually my poetry and my writing kind of passion, and especially exploring race through writing and poetry, that has made me explore and uncover and examine my own identity more closely.
And tell me more about that. So what was that a way of like telling your stories, and kind of did you share it with the world as well? Was it something for you to write poetry for yourself?
I weirdly, because of my experience with drum and bass, I see myself more as a performer, as a writer, but I get more joy out of the writing. So the writing is a very private thing, but I yearn to perform it. I'm not like other people who like hold it close.
Yeah.
And I feel comfortable on the stage. So actually what ends up happening is I use poetry, spoken word specifically, as a vehicle for exploring issues around race. Because for East Asian person to talk about race comes with all of its complexities and often falls on deaf ears. But when you put it in a kind of creative frame, it allows me to be more free, more brave as well. But also it allows me to say things to people who otherwise wouldn't listen. So similarly, you know, going back to the DJ analogy, like my favourite music to DJ is dancehall and bashment, and a bit of Afro beats. A lot of other stuff besides. I'm a UK garage kid as well. Like, you know, I grew up on hip hop, so you know it changes, but with poetry there's kind of a singular focus there, and it's about picking what your focus is. And so in this case I was like, well, I could talk about my identity, and one of the reasons I started up Lyrix Organix, which we'll talk about in a bit, I'm sure, was less to I want to put on an event. It was actually, I want to be a poet. How do I pedal the open mic circuit for 2 or 3 years and then become average? Or do I surround myself with people who I look up to and think are amazing, give them a space, and then kind of take notes that way?
Wow.
And so, so a lot of what I've done has come from this proactive route. It's like, how can I get there quickest?
Wow, okay. That's super interesting, actually, because learning from the best is a great way to do it. And I really like how you have this kind of theme of using your voice. Definitely, you're a performer in like lots of senses, in terms of like music, letting that kind of tell a story too, because I think that does, doesn't it? Like we're so like, emotion is so intrinsically linked when you like perform and you take people on a journey. I think it's beautiful. Was that a form of release as well, did you find, with just like music and like DJing in general?
Like I would say that if there's any one of the many things I do that brings me the most amount of joy when I'm in the pocket, it's DJing. Because it, as you know, it gives you that freedom to express yourself, and it's because you're playing other people's tunes typically as well. It also means that you don't have that kind of artist ego pressure that you put on yourself, where you're like, this performance has to be amazing. So so that you have diminishing returns when you perform, because you're always like cross-examining your own performance. Whereas actually when you're DJing, the relationship there is about creating that middle ground, which is ultimately the dance floor, where you can kind of share experiences and curate experiences. So ultimately the thread that runs through everything that I do, as well as kind of creating spaces for people, is curating spaces. And
I love that you've managed to create a career that does that, because like creating spaces for people, to be like the way you do it as well, like you include people that weren't necessarily included, which I think is really, really important.